about growing lilies from seed today. Okay, so we have somebody on the chat. Okay. Anyways, so I guess we could get my PowerPoint up, and we'll be having Forrest as a co-speaker today. And most of you, I don't know if you know Forrest. Forrest li lives just in Minneapolis, Minnesota, around that area approximately. And he has been got the lily bug in 2003 when he was at the Null show in Bloomington. And from there, he has gotten totally immersed in growing lilies. His he he filled out the yard at his house with lilies. Every single spot was filled with lilies, and then finally he rented some land, and now he has how big a plot is it, Forrest? About a half acre?
Yeah, it's about half an acre.
Half an acre. Half an acre of lilies.
Pretty much.
There's a few vegetables, but not just a few.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to be talking about start growing lilies from seed. So let's do that. Okay, next slide. There are many approaches to growing lilies from seed. Today we'll be showing you just a couple of these approaches. Next, we will start with Forrest Piper, as I mentioned. Next will be what I do. And lastly, I will describe a number of other ways from other people. Next slide. And also there is the December 2007 bulletin, and that was basically dedicated towards growing lilies from seed. And there are, well, 7 articles in there. And Stephanie, do you want to tell everybody how they can get a copy of this?
It was just added to the website, so you can go on to the website to the store, and you can either order a print copy or you can download a digital copy.
Thank you. Okay, so that's a major source, and there are, like I said, a number of different approaches there. Okay, here we go. Next, there are several seed germination modes that we have to talk about, the epigeel and the hypogeel. Next slide. And this is thanks to Rick's wonderful slides here. Epigeel is where the cotyledon grows upward while the root descends. This is what we normally consider germination. Visible bulb appears secondarily, typically easier and quicker to grow. Hypogeel is where the first growth is downward. Visible bulb appears quickly. Upward growth initiates from the new bulb. Not quite as easy, may take 2 seasons to sprout above the ground. So the hypogeel is where you get the fancier lilies, the species, the orientals. The epigeel is where you get your Asiatics and your trumpets. Next. Here's an epigeel seed, classic. This is the species, but here it's usually immediate. The cotyledons grow upward. As you can see, there's the seed capsule at the very top, and eventually the bulb is growing down below. This is the easiest to grow. Next. Hypogeel seed is the first growth is downward. Visible bulb appears quickly. Upward growth initiates from the new bulb. Now, Rick's beautiful pictures here are here, and you can see the number one is where the seed is just germinating, and this is in the ground. Number two is when you can start seeing the formation of a bulb. 3, you'll see a little bigger bulb, and 4, you can see that where the number is, that's the little bulb that formed. And if you look below, there's the Lilium brocade that's open pollinated, and that's a martagon, and you can see the germinating seeds.
If I could explain a little more about these were done with the baggy method, so that they were actually not they didn't have the opportunity to grow straight down. Otherwise, the stems that are coming out of the seed would be going straight down from the street seed all the way to the bulb. In this case, they were kind of all wonky because they were already at the bottom of the bag.
Thank you.
So they couldn't go down anymore. So they were just weaving around, trying to find a way down. And the other thing is as was mentioned before, how quickly these little bulbs grow. The 1, 2, 3, 4, it just so happened that each one of these seeds germinated one day later. It's not like the number 1 is more than 1 day old, but there's 1 day between the number 1 and number 2, and 1 day between number 2 and number 3, and 1 day between number 3 and number 4. So they really do grow fast initially.
Thank you. Next slide.
And I wanted to say that really what the word means, that's epigeel and hypogeel, it just means just what Rick was saying. The first thing you see come up is above the ground. I mean, the first thing that happens, you see above the ground with the epigeals, it means above, and hypogeel means it's happening, but it's below the ground. So you don't ever see the cotyledon, but because what happens there is the root goes down and swells up to be a bulb at the bottom, and then the leaves that are the true leaves are what come up, but they usually have to have a cold dormancy break or something. But
And
one is quick above ground, 30 days almost to the minute is when you'll see stuff above ground. Okay.
we're hoping 30 days to the minute. OTs are not that easy, Judith.
No, but
Anyways.
epigeel either usually.
No, I know. Okay. This is a slide from the North Star Lily Society that Rick has done, and it gives you information if you're interested in species of all the different types of germination, that either immediate or delayed, or there's immediate epigeel, there's delayed hypogeel. So I just thought I'd share that with you. If you go to the North Star Lily Society website, you'll find it there. Thank you, Rick. That was very nice of you doing all that work. Next slide. Okay. OTs have both types of germination occurring at the same time with the same cross. Here we have an immediate epigeel and an immediate hypogeel, or immediate, yeah. The immediate epigeel is in the background there. You can see the seed capsule, and here's a true leaf coming up, and they're both germinating at the same time. So you got to be careful with OTs. They can do a little OT crosses have a lot of variance to them. Next
And I
slide.
think that's more so because they're usually polyploids.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
here here's what is the result of the previous seedling that came up. This is what, and I am assuming that it was the immediate hypogeel that this is the result because it has more of the oriental characteristics in it. And I'm finding that more of the newer OTs, Touchstone and some of those, they have more oriental in them too. So you'll find more immediate hypogeel. So they take longer to sprout than the regular seeds or epigeel seeds. Next slide. So next is Forrest, and he's going to tell how he grows lilies from seeds. Forrest, please.
Hello. You got a slide for me? Thank you. I started growing lilies from seeds in 2006, and my technique over the years has evolved quite a bit. But I still plant about the same number of seeds, somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500. And at least half of those are Asiatic, usually more than that. Most of the rest are trumpets and Aurelians, and actually more Aurelians than trumpets. The few species and OTs I have that I start are also IE, and I say IE for OTs because most of the OTs I grow are actually more T than O. So I'll do crosses of a tetra OT with a tetra trumpet or something like that. And they behave as IE as far as I can tell. So the schedule I use, I can't wait to get started in the fall. So I will plant seeds in November unless I have some vacation problem or something. But I'll get them started by at latest January. And I'll keep them inside under lights all winter. And in May, which is the planting month here, not too cold, not too warm yet, they'll go out in May after several transition steps. So before planting, I'll store my seeds in the freezer in coin envelopes. And the only thing I do when I plant them is take them out to warm up a little bit. And the OT seeds, I will put in a 10% bleach solution for about 20 minutes. And I do that and then rinse them. I do that because I read it was a good idea to do, and I don't know whether it really has any effect, but I do it anyway. Next slide. For pots, when I started out, I saw that Hugh and Ruth Cocker, their former great hybridizers in Minnesota here, they were using 3-inch pots to start seeds. So I thought, well, that must be a good idea. So I actually used 3.5-inch pots, and I had 15 to a tub. But over time, I discovered that they really require a lot of maintenance to make sure they have the right amount of water and they dry out pretty quickly. So I moved to using much larger pots. Now I use 5.25 by 5.25, and you'll see one on the next slide. And 8 of those fit exactly in a 10-20 tray. So it's really convenient, really uses space very well on the shelf, and I'll probably continue to do that. I'll probably plant about 25 seeds in one of those pots. For media, I use Pro Mix. When I started out, I used just some seed starting mix that you found at the nursery. And I eventually started to use Pro Mix, and that seems to work a little better. The HP Pro Mix, the high porosity Pro Mix is best, but I don't always have that here. But I use Pro Mix of some kind. To plant the seeds, I'll fill the pots to within about 1/2 inch of the top and soak them overnight, soak the pots overnight so the Pro Mix is just soaked. And then the next day, I'll plant seeds on the surface of the soil or surface of the Pro Mix, as I said, about 20 or 25. And then I'll cover that with completely saturated vermiculite. Well, I'm sorry, before I do that, mist the seeds heavily. You want to get the seeds as wet as you possibly can when you plant them. So cover them with saturated vermiculite. Don't forget the label. And I cover the tray with a plastic cover at that point. And then the Asiatics are put under lights immediately in a room that's about 70 degrees. And that's where they stay all winter. The trumpets and Aurelians, I put them in a room that's a little cooler, about 62 degrees or 60 degrees. And I'm not sure if I read it first or tried it first, but I must have had a reason. Probably about 10 years ago, I wasn't having as good success with trumpets and Aurelians as I was with Asiatics. They took a long time to come up, which is normal, but really a long time to come up. And I wasn't pleased with that. So I started putting them in a colder room for the first 3 weeks, and then moved them to the same place where the Asiatics are. That seems to work a lot better. I don't know if it's my imagination or not, but it seems to work for me, so that's what I do. Again, cover them with plastic cover, and I put them under lights right away as soon as they get to the warm room. And in about 3 weeks, you'll start to see sprouts. Next slide, please. Okay, here's not a very good picture of the pots I use. That's a 5.25 by 5.25 by 6 inches deep, and that's the 10-20 tray. So 8 of those fit in there, and that's how I plant all my seeds now. Let me say a little about watering. I use bottom watering only, and that's mostly for convenience. It's just too much trouble to get at the tops of the pots to water from the top, and it also when they're really young, it tends to disturb the soil surface, and that's not good. So I just always water from the bottom. When the first leaves start to appear, I feed them about once a week with a weak solution of Miracle Grow, about 20 or 30%. And if they need more water than that, I'll just use plain water, tap water. Next slide, please. Okay, these are my little pots. These are the 3.5-inch pots. This is what they look like after the misting. So you can see they get pretty wet. Next slide, please. This is what the pots look like now when I cover them with vermiculite. So you can see they're full to the top. That's pretty coarse vermiculite. In time, the top tends to dry out a little bit, and that's really okay. That discourages things like mold and moss and other bad things that can grow on the top. So that's okay. Let me talk about lights a little bit. I've always used, until this year, I've always used shop lights, just fluorescent lights. So fixtures with two 4-foot 40-watt bulbs, one cool and one warm, and hang those over the pots, and I can move them up and down as the plants get higher. This year, I started converting some of the spaces to LED grow lights. And I think next year, I'll probably do all of that if I can manage that. The LED grow lights they're better in every way. They're a fraction of the cost to run. The power's a lot cheaper. The spectrum is much better. So I think the plants are growing much better than they do under the fluorescent lights. And they're smaller, so you don't get in the way so much when you try to fit plants on a shelf and so on and so forth. And you can concentrate the light a lot more. So if you want to make a really bright light, it's easier to do that than it is for fluorescent light. All you can do on fluorescent lights is just move the plants closer to the light, and that's fine. But if you want to make it even brighter than that, you can do that by with the LEDs, because they're so bright in such small an area. So I can't say enough about them. I think you should use them if you start. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. Gnats, fungus gnats. Well, I've had some over the years, and I know just about everybody has problems with fungus gnats in their seedlings. I've tried a bunch of different things, and then I tried a soil soak, which is really made for a lawn and grubs and things like that. But I thought, well, larva's larva, so I'll use this. Now, when I was putting, and it actually works really well. Unfortunately, when I was putting the notes together for this talk, I realized that the imidacloprid.
Just call it marathon. That's what everybody knows it as, marathon.
Okay, that's a neonicotinoid. And so it's probably not wise to be using on plants that are going to be pollinated or even visited by friendly insects. So next year I'm going to look for something else. But if I can find a soil soak that works, I'm going to use that, because that method at least works pretty well. I
I've
rarely
found
have to.
that mosquito bits or mosquito dunks, watering them with that will take care of the larvae. You just have to do it 2 or 3 times, because a lot of things kill the gnats, but they lay their eggs so fast and they grow into larvae, and that, and just like you said, that's the problem. So I found that with those 2 things, I can pretty much take care of them. The nice thing about the imidacloprid is that it is systemic. So, but the fungus gnats don't come in, and when they're flying around, they're not sucking up. It's when they lay their eggs on the surface, and the larvae are big enough to see. You'll see what looks like little white dots on the surface of the soil. And then the mosquito bits, or mosquito dunks, they're called, were developed because it's a bacteria that will eat larvae of mosquitoes, but it also eats fungus gnat larvae. And so I stopped them dead in their tracks by using that. So just adding it and letting it soak overnight and using that to water your plants. So
I also have, we have a grower here of, she's actually in the Rock Garden Society here, and she does a lot of rhododendrons from seed. Rhododendrons are very tiny seeds, so she's got to keep the humidity very high initially.
Yeah.
I mean, she's always had problems with fungus gnats also, and she uses some form of neem as
Oh,
a
yeah.
mulch before for the fungus gnats.
Yeah, but you got to use something that hits them both when they're flying around and when they're larvae, because what the things usually will kill one or the other, but not both. So, and I tried diatomaceous earth with my African violets, but it's not enough to mess up the larvae. And a lot of growers don't think you need to worry about it with lilies because they have pretty strong, thick roots. But the little fine roots that you want to keep going, the root hairs and things like that, the larvae will come in there. So the other thing to do is once they get some roots going is using the mycorrhizae if you can, because that'll help them until they get back from having their roots eaten by the larvae. That helps carry them over. So anyway, I think it would be really interesting to hear different people to give their experiences, because the only way you find out if something works is you try it out and see.
Yes. Thank
I-
you.
Yep.
I have, I've had some experience with this too. Very frustrating to have the fungus gnats. But since I've been using Pro-Mix with fungicide and mycorrhizae, I have not had the issue that I used to have. And I don't know what fungicide is in there, but, so I don't know if it's a bad thing to use.
No,
Um,
it's not the same thing that's in the Pro Mix. It's
It's
I can't,
mycorrhizoid.
yeah, but it also has something in there that is
Oh, does it?
that's
Yeah.
that's
I-
anti
So I
the
get,
insects, but it's one of the, it's not an insecticide, so
yeah.
it's not one
So,
of
yeah, so I get the HP with mycorrhizae and fungicide
yeah.
from Promix, and that's been wonderful. And I also read that another way to do it is to put your bag of potting mix out in the hot sun, and the black plastic will make it really hot in there, and that's supposed to kill any larvae that might be in the potting mix.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's where the fungus gnat come in with, if you have a source of humus or organic matter, like if you have a bag of peat moss in your garage, as I do, and it's not tightly sealed, they'll get in there, and that's often the source. So
Okay. Boris, what's next?
Next slide, please. Okay, this is an action photo of seedlings growing. These are trumpets these are actually this year's trumpets after 70 days. Actually, the ones in the front are Aurelians, but they look the same. Next slide.
don't they look
Please.
beautiful?
Yes, I was thinking the same thing.
So I go down in the basement for inspiration every once in a while, because these are all in the basement. Okay, here's the Asiatics after 70 days, and you can see the fluorescent lights above them. If you use LEDs, LEDs are about a quarter of an inch thick, and you can put them anywhere. They come in different forms, but one thing you can do is just hang them. And if you hang them, it only takes up a quarter of an inch as opposed to about 3 or 4 inches of vertical space. Okay, next slide.
You can use the El Cheapo shop lights for the LEDs, and I found their usually K value is usually 4,100, and that's works pretty good. You could get you can get it for under $20.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
have pretty good luck with those. And you have to watch out because some of the ones with grow lights are too intense and will burn them because the light is intense. It's not diffuse either. And so if you find it's too bright, what you do is just shorten the day length. And I found that worked pretty well. So
right. If you just look on Amazon, and there have to be 20 different
oh yeah.
varieties and shapes and sizes and so on of
And you
LED
just
grow
find
lights.
what fits with how you like to do it.
Yep. And some have settings where you can set the brightness. Some have timers built in. I mean, whatever you want, it's probably out there. Okay, here are some seedlings in the old kind of pots after 94 days, just for comparison. Next slide, please. And finally, these are the old pots again, the small ones. These are the ready to go in the ground. Now, with the bigger pots, when they're ready to go in the ground, they look a lot bigger than this. I mean, a lot more leaves and a lot more robust. I will say, next slide, please. The process of getting them out of the basement and into the ground doesn't seem very complicated, but the getting into the ground stage is probably where I'll lose more of my seedlings at any one time, and just the transplant shock, or call it what you will. So I spend a lot of time shepherding trays around. First, they go from the basement where it's 70 to out to the 3-season porch where it's probably 50 or 60 under lights again. And then when the outside temperature is 50 or so, I'll take them outside for a while in the shade, then gradually get them used to more light and more outside temperature changes and so on. So usually the more time you spend in making this a gradual process rather than a shock, the better off the seedlings are going to be. By May, it's warm enough to plant in the ground here. So finally, hopefully find a cloudy, cool day where you finally take the plants out of the pots and put them in the ground. I'll just take the whole root ball together out of the pot, dig a hole and plant everything at once, all at once, without disturbing it, into the ground. Water it in very well. And for a while, I lightly mulched over the leaves and trying to keep them from getting sunburned or dehydrated or what have you. But I've discovered that if you just cover them completely so that you can't see any leaves at all anymore, and I use wood chips now, it works better. In about a month, you'll see lots and lots of big, healthy leaves come flying out of the ground, and you're done. You know, now they're on their own. But it's so the area where I plant my lilies is pretty hot. It's completely enclosed in a fence, so there's very little air movement. It gets pretty hot in there. So when the seedlings get planted out at first, they're really under a strain. So I think burying them in mulch is probably the right thing to do, and that's what I do. Now,
What size are your wood
first
chips,
year,
Forrest?
pardon me?
What size are your wood chips? Because I think this is a great
Um,
idea, and I think this would be great for tissue cultures, getting them because they're so watery, you know.
Yeah, I would say medium. I've tried the large bark, but that doesn't work too well. But
No.
it's not sawdust either. I mean, probably maybe an inch or so, 3/4 of an inch or an inch, half an inch, something
Oops.
like that, a mix of
I'm gonna
sizes.
try this. I think that's just, see, I always learn so much from people. Yeah.
I'll find that if pots planted in May, some of them, sometimes a lot of them, will throw up a stem in the summertime. And well, this is nice. You don't really want them to bloom too far into the summer because obviously they'll lose their strength in the bulb and the bulb won't be as big as it would if you had just budded them. So if I were really disciplined, I wouldn't let any of those bloom, but I'm not. So I will let some of them bloom into August, but if they're going to bloom after that, or if they look like they're not going to bloom by August, I'll just bud them right away. And that's about it. Most of the Asiatics will bloom the next year or the next year after that. Trumpets and Aurelians might take one more year, although they start blooming the first year after the planting. And that's it. Any questions?
Next slide, Marilyn.
There we go.
Yeah, Forrest, it's Steve Wilson here. I had a question about going back to the last slide about when you cover the bulbs, cover the leaves when you plant them out. What do you think's happening with the bulb at this time? Are these sort of very young leaves that are forming off of the scales on the outside of the bulb, because they're not really putting up a stalk yet? These are just leaves coming off of the outer scales of the bulb that's developed. Is that what you think's happening?
Yeah, that's what I think is happening. I haven't dug down there to find out, but I believe so.
That is what's
Um,
happening, yeah.
Yeah, and just from, from planting them, I can tell that there are some pretty big bulbs in there in the ground when I plant them. But all of the leaves are coming off the scales on the side of the bulb. You're right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
was
more
just thinking of, yeah, I was just thinking about the mechanism about how this next set of leaves are generated. But yeah, I think it must be coming off
and
of other scales around the inside of the bulb.
And in plant
Right.
morphology, in the morphology of the bulb, if you study the development of the bulb or you watch your embryo cultures and things like that, that's what happens. Each leaf is is in fact an extension of the bulb scale. So as you get the new ones, that's where they're coming from. But what is interesting is I think that what he's doing here is you're protecting so much of the losses come from that the things are watery and the leaves have a pretty big evaporative surface. So you're preventing that evaporation from happening. And once the growing tip gets any light at all, that'll stimulate it to make new scales and new leaves. So I think you're hitting two things at the same time, that you're keeping them, and that's why I think this would be so great when we're transplanting tissue cultures. You're keeping them from drying out, from evaporating
Right.
everything out. And because once they're cooked out, dried out, then they're gone. But you're also, enough light comes through because it's not like fine sawdust. So enough light will will hit the growing tip, because I've done that with embryo cultures, and I've also done it with hypogeal seed when I didn't have time to fuss around and I didn't have time for a cold spell, and I just left the plants sitting on the surface so they got light, then they all sprouted anyway. But that doesn't usually fit in with your growing other things, and you can't do that with thousands of seeds.
I have a comment. David Maltby, are you still here? David? I can't.
Yes, I am.
Okay, what type of, do you want to tell them what type of wood mulch you use?
Yeah, well, I use it as mulch. I also use it as soil modification. I use medium, well, they refer to them as medium shavings at the farm supply place where I go, and they're pine softwood shavings, or spruce or pine, and I use them as mulch on almost everything. And I also, when I'm redoing a bed, I'll work in an excessive amount of shavings into the soil, because I'm in a city lot here, and the soil underneath is concrete hard. So I work that into the soil, and my thoughts always are is that that incorporates so much air into the soil that allows the bulbs to grow and put the roots out a lot easier than if they're trying to burst through the soil. So yeah, I've been doing it. It's worked. I've done it in several gardens now, different types of soil, and it's worked for me good on every garden. So
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to say one other thing. Usually they always say, "Oh, you have to be so careful about using sawdust,"
yeah,
because as it breaks down, it sucks out a lot of nitrogen. But when you use wood shavings, or when I've used cedar shavings and things like that, it doesn't break down rapidly. It does just what David said. It gives you the aeration as well as helping the water not to evaporate.
And
So you,
insulation, yeah, from heat
yeah,
and keeping the water
yeah,
moisture in.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
It makes a little difference to what kind of wood it is. If it's a coniferous wood, with the resins in it, it doesn't break down nearly as fast as other deciduous types do.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say too was with you were mentioning about how the wood mulches, still allow the light to get down in at least somewhat, as opposed to more organic mulches like leaf mulches. So even though leaf mulches are good, in this case, the wood mulches would be better for that.
Yeah,
Because
they
it
are.
allows the light to get down into to stimulate the bulbs a little more.
Yeah, and wherever you are locally, that's where you find out what's a good mulch for you, because
Where you
like
can get
where
it.
we are, one of the mulches that we used in the greenhouses for a lot of the tissue cultures where we would have problems with fungus gnats was hazelnut hulls. They come crunched up. And I thought, oh boy, this works so great. So I put that out and I thought this is going to be great. And before I brought the bag home and stuck it out on my backyard, and before I even could open the bags, the next morning, the bags were ripped open and there were shreds all over everywhere because the squirrels just thought, woo, woo, woo. So I thought, this is not what I want to put on my embryo cultures to keep the squirrels
Oh,
out.
no.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is funny, yeah.
Next slide then. Let's go on. Okay, this is my approach to growing lilies from seed, and this is just my way. Next. Okay, I start with 18 cells to a tray, the 10, 20 trays. I found this size minimizes the space, but the growth is similar to the next size up size cell, like similar to what Forest has. So I start with there you can see the 18 cells, and then I put Pro Mix in, next slide. The HP, Microzoid, Izoid, and it's HP. I found the HP is better than the regular Pro Mix because HP is designed for seedlings and they're well drained. So then I put the seeds in the cell packs, 15, 20 seeds to a cell pack, depending on how many seeds I have. And then, next slide. I cover them and water them thoroughly, just like Forest, very thoroughly, and they're all labeled. So I really put a lot of moisture in. I let it really get soaked up, and then I take them down, next slide,
How
into
deep
the
do you cover?
basement. What?
How deep do you cover?
Oh, just on this, what? Just enough to cover them. Yeah, quarter inch,
Hmm.
3/8, something like that, so that they don't float up. And then I bring them down to the basement, and it's the coolest part of the basement. The temperature I checked just recently, around now is 64. Depending on the winter, it could be going from 60 to maybe 66. And I have them on a covered on a plastic with a plastic tray. And there is some breathing because I know some of the cells will dry out, so I have to keep an eye on them, make sure they're moist at all times before they germinate. Okay, next slide. And here they are starting to germinate. This is this year's crop. And some of the cell packs will have germinated, and some of the cells will not have germinated. I usually wait about a week after they first start germinating, and if nothing happens after a week, then I move them back, to take the cells out, put them in another tray, and move them back to the cooler side of the basement. Because some of these, like these with more of the oriental in them, they will take longer to germinate. They'll take up to 2 months to germinate. And then you'll probably see a true leaf come out because they're hypogeo. Next slide. And that's what I said, after a week or so. Some of them which have more of the trumpet in them, they'll germinate quite a bit faster. The ones that have more of the OT in them, they will take longer to germinate. Now, under the lights, the temperature approaches 70 to 72. So it gets a little, I feel that's a little too warm for some of these OTs to germinate. They really like it cooler for germination. Next slide. And then when the possibility of frost has passed, the trays are moved outside, usually at the beginning of May, and they're moved to the east side of the house where I do not get any direct sun. And there they're hardened off for about a month. Next slide. And then towards the end of June, I put them in 10-inch azalea pots for over the summer. And I have them here. I've tried putting them in pots and then putting them out in the field, but we get too much rain and then botrytis sets in. So here I have them under the eaves troughs, right by the garage where I can control the watering. So it very seldom rains on this side, or very seldom does moisture get into them. So it's all my watering that keeps them moist. Okay, next. And then for overwintering the first year seedlings, some of them I leave in pots and store them in a cool place. And that is right now where the field is, and he has cold storage, which is kept cool. It does not freeze in his walk-in cold storage, but it's perfect it's around 4 degrees, 6 degrees Celsius. So it's good for overwintering the seedlings. Now, some of them I take out. Next slide. I could take them out of the pots. The bigger ones I will take out of the pots, and I will put them in a freezer baggie and overwinter them in the cool place that does not freeze. And you can see I leave the label in. There's a little hole so the baggie will breathe, and I leave the roots on. They're not totally dry, but there's a touch of moisture in them, and they will overwinter. And then next slide. And then some of these seedlings that have started to sprout in the cold storage, usually around March sometime. Asiatics will start sprouting around now. Then I will take them out and put them in the 18 cell packs again, and replant them. Have them in the basement so that they sprout out in there. You can see them sprouting, and then I'll replant them later on in this May. Next slide. And these seedlings will be replanted in May in 4 to 5-inch pots, and then they're hardened off. And either will be replanted directly into the field, or if they're not doing really good, I'll replant them back in again into the 10-inch azalea pots. It's a lot of work, and what I've found is that, as Forrest said, in 2020, I had put them in what I had normally done was at the fall, I take them out of the pots and plant them in the soil and then cover them up. But for 2020, hardly anything grew. There was only maybe half a dozen plants that grew. So I decided to do this method instead, and it seems to be working better for me at the present time. I'm not getting such huge losses on the seedlings. Next. And then this is where this was the last year, 2019, where I had taken the seedlings out of the pots, do not disturb the soil, put them in the hole, and then covered over and put some a little bit of compost on them, and then they sprouted. This is what they looked like in 2020, but in 2020 to 2021, that did not happen. So after that, I started overwintering them either in the pot or in the little baggies, and then repotting them in the springtime, and then planting them in the field later on in June. Next slide. And then there's the baggie method. And this is where Rick is an expert in here. And the baggie method is very good method because you can see what is happening with the seed, but it's a lot of work. Next slide.
It's really not that much work, you know,
Well,
because you big baggies, and then all you do is when you see that the little bulblets are as big as they're going to get, if they stop getting bigger.
yeah, but if they're immediate and you have delayed and immediate with the same
but I'm
bag, then it's a lot of
talking about-
work because
I'm
you've got
not
to.
talking about with wild crosses, I think like those were bags of mardigan. So
Yeah.
that's an easy way to do it. You never have to do anything until you've stuck it in the fridge or the cooler or whatever. And then whenever it's good enough to be outside, you just shake that all out and put the a little soil on top and you're good to go. So it's a good, it depends on what you're trying to do. For what you're trying to do, that wouldn't work because you,
Well, no, I do the baggy method on
yeah,
some of
but
the
I mean, it wouldn't
OTO
be
crosses.
it wouldn't be easy because you,
No, it's a lot of work because you got to take out the ones that sprout, immediate hypogeo,
yeah,
and,
seedling.
and put them in a cell pack, and then leave and then reseal the bag and let go through the whole process of the hypogeo
But
process.
what you have to always remember is whether it's epigeel or hypogeel, until it's making big leaves that can go through photosynthesis, until that happens, all the food is actually coming from the endosperm in the seed.
That's Rick's
So
comment.
you don't have to worry about some of this stuff until then. It would be
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So and then there was Jeff Stiller. Was it Rick? You had used this
Hmm?
method, or was
Yeah,
it Patrick? Patrick has used this
but
method too.
yeah, I generally just use them in little bags. The big bags work great for growing them on too and getting bigger stuff than what I do.
and the
And
other thing that you can see when you do them in the baggies, because like we used to do this, for all the hypogeals at Oregon bulb farms, is you can look in there and you can see if they're not germinating, if they're not, then usually it's because you need just a little more water. You don't want to get it too wet. You've got to have little holes punched in there if it's a big,
yeah, so
and you've got,
Jeff,
of course, medium. But we used to just take our fingers and go flump, flump with water into there. And that usually that would be all it would take into the bag. And they did thousands and thousands of all the Oriental strains that way. And
oh,
it's quite
yeah.
large bags, you know.
Mhm.
So,
As you can see here, Jeff says he puts them in cold storage for 3 months.
yeah.
I always freeze my seeds before planting them. A minimum of 6 weeks in the freezer. I always freeze them. That's one thing. I found they germinate much better if they have had gone through a cold cycle. And
And
that,
that's also true of the epigeals. I mean, even the trumpet seeds, because the trumpets are wired to come up a few this year and maybe some next year. When you freeze them, they are all clicked into the same thing and they're ready as soon as it's warm and damp, they're ready to go.
yeah, yeah. So you get much
So
better
it's a way to
germination.
synchronize things too.
So he starts with 1 gallon sealable freezer bags and prick small holes in them. That's important. You got to prick small holes in them, right, Yanis? Remember that part?
Mhm.
So that they can breathe and the
Yes.
water can drain. In each bag, he puts 25 to 100 seeds with a cup of water and then seals the end and sets the bags in a tray. And then he rinses them out every week and turns the bags upside down and replenishes the water, which is
I
this
don't
is
understand why he does that.
I don't know understand either. I'm just saying
Yeah,
there are
I
options
was going to say
because
the other thing you can tell when they're in a clear bag is you can, the other way you tell that the water, you got it the right amount of damp is when the
yeah,
roots start to come out, they'll have, if it's the right level, they'll make lots of root hairs. And if you look at the bags and you don't see any root hairs, you know, you need to sprinkle a little more water. So, and
next
that's
slide,
also true in tissue culture. That's how you can tell if you've got everything working well in the test tube.
Marilyn, next slide. Yeah. And then he uses bleach for the last. But then see, he there's growing in the baggies. He keeps the temperature around 65, and then he takes them out of the baggies, and then he plants them. And then next slide. But it's a lot of work. This is
Yeah. I also don't understand why he would bleach them at that point, because by that time, if they're alive and they're not showing any mold, I wouldn't be worried about that. And
yeah.
I use mycorrhizae, so I wouldn't want to be killing it all. But there must be a reason or he wouldn't be doing it.
Well, there was several people that had espoused that, and it's in the December 2007 bulletin about using bleach. That was one of Larry Deal's method of, and I think this comes from that where he used these styrofoam cups and had them in the water and bleach, and then he over a couple of weeks and then you
And it
plant them
may
out.
be that they're different fungi than what I'm dealing with, but you're not going to kill the spores of a fungus with bleach, but you can kill the delicate little germinating mycorrhizae. So I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah,
And
so
we did some studies with it. What we found was the only thing you gained was a little, like if you soak them for 2 or 3 days in bleach or in water even early before you planted them, all you gained was that they were damp 2 or 3 days earlier. So they germinated 2 or 3 days earlier than the ones that you started that you thought were controlled, but they were actually just 2 or 3 days behind. So I would want to do it. If I did that, I would want to pick something that I had a lot of seed and I would want to just do half and half and see if it made any difference.
and then Jeff keeps the lights on 14 to 14 to 16 hours. So do I. I do not keep them on 24 hours a day. Forrest says he does that. I keep them around 14 to 16 hours.
Yeah. And I've done it both ways with embryo cultures. I've left them on and I haven't seen a big difference. But that was under fluorescent light, so it probably wasn't so bright.
Yeah. And
But
I've done it both
yeah.
ways too. And I found that why waste the energy? You're
Yeah,
not gaining
yeah.
much by keeping them on 24 hours a day. Next slide. And bagging method, here is Rick's bagging method. You want to go over your bagging method, Rick?
Sure. So these are just little small bags. They're like 2 by 3 inch, or I'll use 3 by 5 inch ones. Um, I use them a lot. Well, they're all used for hypogeal germinating seed, whether they're going to be delayed or epigeal. Very often the delayed epigeal ones are going to be, well, delayed, so that you never really know sometimes when they're actually going to start sending up their leaf. So in this way, you can always watch and see what happens. And the other reason why I like these little things is because so many times I'll end up with seeds that just look a little wonky, and I don't know whether they're really viable or not. So I can just stick them in the bags, let them do what they want, and if they don't do anything, I just throw away the bag. Who cares? It doesn't take any room. Real easy to do. But yeah, I always mark what they are. Of course, you can see I've got how many seeds are in there. You'll be able to see when we go on the next slide, the that
Next slide, Marilyn.
yes, please. That I put the vermiculite in here. I'll use a fine vermiculite. You could use perlite too, but I like vermiculite because it holds more and more moisture in suspension.
Yeah, it holds more
not,
air too, I think, because with perlite it goes through, but with the vermiculite, it always holds a good level. I prefer vermiculite.
right. The perlite is a closed cell system where it's inside the perlite
It doesn't absorb.
stone. There is no water in there. It's only around the outside on the perlite that holds water. So the same size of a piece of perlite compared to the size of vermiculite, the vermiculite will actually hold in suspension more water, yet keep it not too much water in there, so that you will be able to actually regulate the right amount of water in that little baggie a lot easier than you would with perlite. The perlite, because there is less water in the end in the total bag system, you have to watch it a lot closer. So that's why I use vermiculite. And you can see that I put the vermiculite in there, and I put the seeds in afterwards over the top of them, so that I can actually watch the seed absorb the water, watch the seed germinate, continue on with their growth, whatever they're doing. I can see what's happening. And for me, at least, that's very interesting to me. And I keep a lot of notes on what's happening so that I can determine what to do next time. And especially with the seeds that look wonky, I can see, well, was it a weird seed or not, or was it not? And actually, what I've been finding more than anything with those weird looking seeds is it really depends on the batch. and I'll get the same weird looking seeds sometimes. And the batches either mostly germinate or they mostly don't. And I never get anything in between. It always seems to depend on what the parents were to begin with. Something else on this picture, you can see on the picture on the right there, you'll see that little one that's got mold on it. Don't worry about that. You know, if something's got mold on it and I can pull it out, I do. But the vermiculite doesn't have nutrients in it for the mold to grow on. The mold is there, it's growing on a dead seed. And it's going to consume the dead seed and then it'll be done. It does not hurt the other growing seeds. It doesn't hurt the little bulb, you know, unless you damage it somehow and make a nice infection point. You don't need to worry about that kind of stuff in this situation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because the ones that get a dark, crummy looking endosperm, it's because the endosperm itself was defective to start with. You know, it's just screwed up. A lot of times they're just not compatible.
Yep.
Okay.
But it doesn't
Next.
spread. And so, I mean, I think, you know, you can water the dickens out of them, but if it's dead, it's dead. And I think that a seed with a nice hard endosperm, that's the best fungicide of all, because I never see mold going into those seeds. I think there's something in them that keeps it out. So it's usually, and you find that out when you do embryo culturing, that the ones that you need to culture are the ones that have a defective endosperm, because you got to get them some food somehow. But look at those plump endosperms. You can really see, and you can see on the right, you see the seed that's the top second from the left on on that one. You can see how it's already used up the food to make you know, you just have an empty little husk when it's finished. It was a good endosperm and it does what it's supposed to do. So,
Next slide.
yeah.
And the bagging method, that's what I use, because sometimes you'll get the hypogeo with the leaf forming, and sometimes you'll have an epigeo where it comes straight up and you have to get them out because the leaf is already forming. So that's what I use the bagging methods with either the OOT crosses or the OTO crosses, where you have a lot of Oriental in them, and they're a mixed bag. So that's why the bagging method, so I can observe the germination, then pick them out. It's really a nuisance, and then and replant them. Next slide. And here again, you have to guess on the germination with the OOTs and the OTOs. It's a mixed bag. See some of the here, one cell here is OTO, and it's pretty well all trumpet. The OT13, we have an immediate, and we have the hypogeo, epigeal, and the hypogeo. Next. And here are some pictures of Joe Astorita and how he plants his seedlings. He's using about the same size as Forrest on the one, but he also uses larger pots for some of the other seedlings. And next slide. And Jeff Stiller and Joe recommend using Great White. It's the mycorrhizide. And
I just ordered 1 ounce of that, and I'm
did
going
you
to
did you
compare it.
okay.
Yeah, you know, I'm always trying, so I'm going to do a little thing and
See
see
if it
which one
works.
works
It
better.
does help
It
a
could be
little. It does
watered
help.
on. Yeah, yeah.
Did you order
That's
some
what I
too,
always want
Forrest?
to really know. Yeah.
Yes, I did.
See, and I couldn't remember what when they first came out with the idea of using mycorrhizae. It was this trichoderma. That's what they used, and I used that for a lot of the embryo cultures. If they came out a little bit moldy from the test tube, I would just dip them in those, because they would give you free sample bags at all the Aggie shows.
Okay. And in Ontario here we have Mike's. That's
Yeah, yeah,
MYKES.
yeah,
That
yeah.
yeah. So that's the local
And what
production.
you want are the ones that will colonize. It's really it increases the absorptive space of your roots. That's what it does. So.
Okay. Next slide.
And presumably it outcompetes some of the crap that that you would otherwise be having to bleach things to get rid of. But now this is what I really want.
Yeah, we got to hear about this, Rick.
Well, one more thing about the mycorrhizae, of course, there is that's the whole idea is to provide a natural ecosystem so that the roots are able to do a better job. There is still, the mycorrhizae is still very often very specific, where one type of species of mycorrhizae might go with liliums and tulips, but not daffodils or something like that.
Yeah, so you always
but
have to,
even-
you always want, to look.
Yeah, but even if you have the wrong ones in the soil, it will still
You
benefit
got to,
something.
Marilyn, you got to shift the slide back.
Yeah.
No,
No,
it's not gonna go backwards. It wouldn't go backwards. Sorry,
Oh, no.
sorry. I'd have to go out of the slide and back in again, out of the.
okay, then do that.
You want me to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, so. Yeah, that's not a big deal.
And then it's the,
That one.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I generally use it's grit. In my case, it's granite grit, because if you're in Minnesota, we have granite, and that's what they locally use. The other places, it's going to be oyster shells or limestone, marble grit sometimes, depending on where you are. And it comes in different sizes also. But the big difference here is that the grits are always crushed rock, so that the pebbles are angular. They're not rounded. And this is important for drainage too. But especially for the reason I use it on lilies, I use it mainly to keep squirrels from digging.
See, that's boy, my ears perk up when you say that. That's
Oh,
what
and the
Yeah.
chipmunks and the chipmunks.
And the chipmunks, right, or anything, but and for me also toads. Toads love my stuff, and fortunately the toads don't do anything except they dig a hole so that they can sit. But still not a good thing. But the sharpness of the stones and the weight of the stones, in my case, because it's granite, makes a big difference. I mentioned when talking before about the pumice being sharper, and that would deter them more because it's sharper, but on the other hand, the pumice is lighter. And that would probably negate it. I really like the way Forrest uses vermiculite over the top of his seeds. That's really a good thing, I think, except for squirrels. Boy, that would be heaven for squirrels. And they would dig on that in no time. Anyways,
how thick is it, Rick?
so yeah, it's going to be, I'd say, about most of the time about a centimeter. So, about
It looks thick there. Yeah.
And what's chicken grit?
Oh, and chicken, it's really the whole reason there is grit in the world is for poultry. Because they eat the rocks for use in their gizzards.
Right.
And so
So is that where you get it? Where you get the
where I
grit?
get it. I get it from the farm stores.
For like feed and seed stores, yeah.
Right. And they're usually sizes 1, 2, 3, and 4, the 4 being the largest, and that's often called turkey grit. And then the number 1 and number 2 is usually the chick grits. because as the chickens grow.
Teeny tiny gizzards, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So actually the number one, the really finer stuff, it's still very sharp, and it's a really nice thing to actually mix in with the soil for my stuff because well, for the lilies, not so much, but I'm into alpine growing too, and they just want a mineral soil compared to lots of good humus and stuff. So any kind of rock material I can put in there that's going to still allow good drainage is good for that. But I'll still put it in for lilies also because it does also put a little weight to the pots so that they don't fall over when they're outside so much. I mentioned, remember, I have squirrels, and the squirrels may not dig, but they are running around over the tops of those pots all the time, and I'll get pots tipped over all the time if they're not heavy enough. Let's see.
Are we looking at, in this picture, is this one like 5-inch pot, or are we looking at the end of a tray, or? That's
let's see. This one is it's a 4.5-inch by 4-inch pot.
And Marilyn,
Okay.
do you want to switch to the next one slide then?
So what size grit is that?
So that was number 4.
Okay.
Okay, and this right here is number 3. And this is a good one just to show the seedlings. You can see the narrow leaves are the cotyledons, and then the wide leaves are the first true leaves. This is just a species Lilium henryi. Next, yeah.
Next, yes. And then this is close to the end. So you start from seed, you get germination, seedlings, and then you get a flower. And that's your chance to grow your own flowers and not the commercial type. And next slide. Any questions?
Can I
Okay.
just say here in New Zealand with your epigeals and your hypergeals, E is for easy and H is for hard.
Oh.
Okay.
Not really hard, just longer.
Yeah, but they just take longer, so we call them hard, you see. Just so you know what
Okay.
you're doing.
And next slide. And Judith is going to be giving a talk with Johann Mock on how lilies have changed in the last 50 years. And the ORLS is sponsoring them at our AGM, and that is in April. It's 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Judith, any comments you want to make?
Oh, I just wanted to comment, this is an illustration of how you do keep learning, that all these years later, I mean, there are not many of us around who remember the lilies from 50 and longer years ago, but I do. So, you know, Johan and I have been friends for that long too. So we've been talking about lilies all that time since before he came to the United States. And he's always marched his own drummer and not just the, you know, lockstep of the hybridizers who do whatever is in vogue. So I'll be really interested to hear his comments too. Because I think the lilies that we have today are beautiful to look at, but they're not as long-lived because they were not developed for the garden. And
They're
that's
developed for the cut flower trade.
you
And
bet.
they're developed to be short-lived.
And they're developed for planned obsolescence. It's like when they
That's exactly the word.
That's-
Planned obsolescence.
yeah, and I want the ones that are still going to be, I mean, Black Beauty has been around for longer than 50 years and nobody has ever said it was a bad lily. It's just a great lily. And you want more like that, like red velvet, those kinds of things that are beautiful to look at and will persist. So.
Okay.
This
Okay,
is
thank
really
you.
fun for me because I learned a lot, you know, from the talk we've just had. Every talk we have, I learn things.
Oh, so there's a question. Do you always store seeds in the freezer? Yes. Right, Judith?
Yes, I do. Sometimes I get slack and I just stuff it back in the refrigerator if I know I'm going to plant it again and you know, in enough pretty soon. But you
No.
can leave it in the freezer for a long
time.
long
Right.
time. I've planted seed that was 40 years old and I got good germination.
Yeah.
So.
If you have them out normal temperatures, they'll die. Keeping them in the freezer, if you want to store seeds, that's the way to do it, in the freezer.
And
So,
the other thing is you shouldn't be so discouraged if you have seed that's like, it looks like big thick seed, but it's kind of dark. If you don't get good germination, it's not because you did something wrong, it's because it had a defective endosperm to start with. And so that's what's going on.
okay.
Brian, I had a quick question, if I may. It's Steve Wilson here.
Yep.
I've been using pumice, which we can get locally here in
No kidding.
in the Northwest, but it's somewhat expensive on a pound per pound basis. And
Right.
I've recently been using Turface MVP. This is this sort of sintered clay material that they put on pitcher's mounds or
Oh, really?
in baseball outfields. And because it's like manufactured on an industrial scale, I found it's about a fifth of the price of pumice on a pound per pound basis.
Oh, and where do you get this?
I get it from I can get it from Ewing's, which is like an irrigation landscaping company. I know that Steve Garvey pointed me towards it because we were talking about
Okay.
very, very, very free draining mixes for some of these sort of alpine
Right.
species. And I found well, it seems to work quite well. It soaks up liquid, and it's sort of hard, and so it doesn't break down like perlite. I was wondering if anybody else uses this.
No, I've never even heard of that. I'm really interested. Wow. Thanks
They
for
use that at golf courses too. And I did experiment with that many years ago, and I don't, does it come in different sizes? Do you know, Steve?
I can't say really. I bought a sort of 20-pound bag of it, and they come in they'll probably be like an eighth of an inch kind of cubes.
Oh, okay.
Broadly. So it's quite fine. Like I say, it's like you might imagine on a pitcher's mound.
Yeah,
Can you repeat the name of it?
It's Turface, Turface, and the product's called Turface MVP, which is a pun on baseball.
Oh, I have to try that.
Designated
If it's derived from clay, does it affect
Turface.
the pH? Do you see anything like that?
I'm not sure about that. I
But
don't
you haven't
know.
seen any
I don't think so because it's baked,
Oh,
so it's pretty inert.
well, we're gonna have to try that out. I think what we should do is we should have a compendium of everybody's hot tips, and then a year from now, we'll all try each other's tips and we can get together and report them. Because I learned.
When I used it, I found that it held too much water. The particle size was too small, but it is still pretty angular. So that's a good thing. It's not round.
So do you use it as a soil additive or a mulch, or what do you use it for?
Well, I don't use it at all
No,
anymore.
I meant Steve.
Steve.
Yeah, so for some of the very for the lilies that need very gritty mixes, I'll still use pumice, this turface material, sand, sort of acidic compost, acidic potting soil, and have a very free draining mix like that. I've been using it this year or so, and it seems to be working fine for me. I haven't had any adverse reactions. And like I said, it's about a fifth the price of
Pumice is expensive.
of buying pumice.
Yeah, I think if you mix it with other things that are either larger aggregate or different different water holding capacities like pumice, it should work very well. Because what it's doing is also the surface on the turfus isn't doesn't absorb water. And so you're giving bulk to the soil with not necessarily more porosity, but a bulk to the soil with less water holding capacity so that it dries out quicker.
Well, that's, I'm
Yeah.
gonna look
Thanks,
into.
Rick.
Yeah.
Okay, anything other? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Forrest. Thank you,
Thank
Rick.
you.
Thank you, Judith.
You always
Thank you,
bless me.
Brian.
Okay, and then we're all set again. So there is the April the 13th where Judith and Johan will be speaking. That is for, you have to register for that so that we know how many people will be there. So because of the Zoom situation. Okay, thank you.
Chuck, I
And
want to talk, I want to speak to you, so don't sign off yet. Okay.
okay, you want to speak to me?
No, to Chuck.
Oh, to Chuck. Okay.